Welcome to NewYorkBIO's Virtual Breakfast Series, a digital program started in 2020, bringing you fireside chats with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. This week's episode features entrepreneur and investor Travis Whitfill.
All right, good morning, everybody. I have 902. My name is Jennifer Hawks-Bland, and I'm the CEO at NewYorkBIO. We are thrilled that you are joining us for another edition of our virtual breakfast series. A special thanks to our partners at Cooley for sponsoring this month's series of breakfast. We have a fantastic guest today in Travis Whitfill. We're going to talk all things entrepreneurship, new companies, and venture investing. So it doesn't get much better than that. With that, as always, my housekeeping reminders for you, please ask questions. We want those questions as we go through our conversation with Travis today. Put them either in the chat or the Q&A, and Derek and I will get to them as we go through the course of our conversation. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to Derek to kick us off. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Good morning. Spring has sprung. First webinar of the spring season. Travis, it is wonderful to have you here. We're super excited. You cover just about everything we could ever think about talking about. You cover company formation, you cover investing, you cover board roles, you even cover equity research. Why don't you give us a little bit of background on you, a little bit of an origin story, and then we'll jump right in.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Travis Whitfill. I guess primarily I would describe myself as an entrepreneur and venture capitalist in biotech. So, started off in the lab about 15 years ago, doing bench research, realized that, studying a single protein wasn't for me, and, spent many hours crystallizing proteins and studying bacterial genetics when I first got started, and realized that wasn't for me and wanted to do something more on a population level. So got my master's of public health in molecular epidemiology when I was at Yale, kind of dabbled in some different things in grad school, and started my first company when I was there called Rejection. That's about to go into phase 2 trials for a rare disease called Netherton syndrome. That's a medical dermatology company engineering the microbiome to treat skin diseases. And then when I left grad school in 2014, I reconnected with my college professor who started this boutique equities research firm. So for the past 8 years, I've been doing a mix of equities research and biotech, but mostly venture capital. Started BIOS Partners in 2014 and have been investing since then. We're about 315-ish million under management now. I sit on the board of 5 companies and 2 nonprofits. Most of those are in cell therapy, so I do a lot of cell therapy companies. Can talk more about that. And 1 med device company and then 2 nonprofits through my academic work. And I think that covers it.
Well, it's not clear how you had the time to come on this webinar, but we're glad that you're here. And also a quick shout out, you're on the board of Innate Bio. We had Will Ho as a guest a few months ago. Super excited about that company. I've known Will for about a decade and he's fantastic. So yes, thumbs up for excellent board and investment suggestions on that one. So I'm interested about how did Azitra come to be, and how did you end up at BIOS, right? Because usually you kind of seem to have done everything at once somehow. So how did all of this come together?
Yeah, I mean, it did kind of come together at once, but when I was in grad school, I used the time to really figure out what I wanted to do. Because I just got into med school and I actually turned down med school to go to grad school to figure out, just kind of more of what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I worked with, I worked in more labs, worked with Tom Stites, who was Nobel Prize winner, doing X-ray crystallography. Even though as cool as it was, decided that, studying a single protein still wasn't for me. So went on to other things. And then I met this really cool med student, Azim Munivar, and we just kind of got to talking about, different intellectual things in biotech and in medicine. He was, a med student, and I was a grad student. We linked up and just kind of started talking about really cool things that we had been seeing through different seminars and on the campus. And at the time, there was a lot happening in the microbiome. And this is 2013, 2012-ish. when the field was still pretty young, and you had these kind of, pseudo pharmaceutical approaches using fecal microbiome transplants to treat C. diff infections. And at the time, they had like 80% cure rate of C. diff, and it was very interesting.
Yeah.
But it's very early. They were basically, we went to one seminar, and pardon me for cussing, but he said, you literally put shit in a blender and put it in a patient and they recover. And we were like, okay, that's really cool, but how do we turn that into a drug? And what other applications are there? So we thought about, different applications. We eventually found that the skin, there's a lot of high unmet needs, dermatology still. And the microbiome is massive on the skin. So we basically had this idea that we can turn skin microbes into drug factories. So we engineer them and they can secrete missing proteins onto the skin. So that was kind of our initial idea. We had some initial grant funding and stuff, formed the company. At first we didn't really think about forming a company. We just thought that we would be eligible for a lot more funding if we were a company, because we were students, and getting NIH funding as students is not super common, but we were able to do it anyway by forming a company, got like some state funding in Connecticut, that kind of stuff. And then it just kind of, over the years took off. And then in 2014, we got some seed funding, we were able to kind of start a lab. And at the same time, I moved back to Texas to do BIOS Partners. So I just kept the two going in parallel. Eventually we got more funding. We were able to hire our first CEO in 2016. And between those two times, I was literally flying back to Connecticut, working in the lab nights and weekends, that kind of stuff. So it was a very challenging couple of years until we got our first CEO. But once we got that, then it really kind of took off, raised a seed round, raised our first Series A, then now B, and now we're raising our C. So, it's kind of taken off, and it took a while to get started. It took us, 4 years to get into the clinic. But since then we've gotten some more
data. I love how you think that's a long time.
Yeah. It felt like a long time.
To get in the clinic, like 4 years. There's aggressive timelines maybe get you into the clinic in 4 years. But it's really interesting because the microbiome space around the time that you're talking about was just on fire. There were microbiome companies everywhere, and there was one of the biggest challenges is, A, do you understand what it actually does, and B, even if you do, what do you do with it? Like, it was very common to hear the correlation is not causation argument with microbiome.
Still true.
It's still true, but at least if you have, your thesis sounds pretty direct, kind of an if then, and you kind of know what you're doing for a therapeutic effect. So that's really interesting. And the fecal transplant stuff was difficult too, because not only did it have an 80% cure rate, it was cheap. It was, it had all of the things going for it that you didn't want to displace. So how did you get involved with BIOS Partners?
Yeah, so 2014, I reconnected with my college professor who, this was like 15 years ago, but, I was like his teaching assistant, and we were talking about like public markets. And at the time, I had no clue about anything finance related. Starting a Zitra, that was my first kind of intro to anything business related. So really had no idea what I was doing, but we reconnected, and he said, I've started this equities research firm. It's very new, but if you want to join me, you'd be like my first hire basically for this equities research stuff. And, I'm starting to invest in single companies. And so I was like, at the time, like, Azitra wasn't really taking off. It was, kind of TBD if it was going to be successful. So I kind of wanted something that was more reliable, I guess. But
the risk.
Yeah. Although it was very risky because we were literally working out of his like master bedroom closet.
Your choices of spreading risk were all risky.
Yeah, exactly. And biotech itself was very risky, right?
It's very risky.
Yeah. So basically we built that together, I think, and we would go to New York. every other month, and we got some good clients, like some of the major hedge funds here in the city. Grew that business, and then we started to invest some of that capital into private companies. And in late 2014, 2015, we kind of formalized BIOS Partners as the VC fund, and we were doing single investing in a single company at first. And then we had our first exit in 2017. We sold a company to Novartis called Encore Vision that was developing a shot for presbyopia, which is when you're, pretty much everyone on the planet will get it at some point, that your eyes, you'll need reading glasses at some point. So there's a drug that they developed for that condition that basically reverses the vision loss. So we sold that for 1.25 billion. 375 million of that was upfront. The rest is still in milestones. But then that kind of really, launched our first official fund. And then quickly deployed that and raised our second. We're now on our third. Now we're raising 2 more funds in the next 12 months, hopefully. So yeah.
Just to stop you there, if you basically say that it took a long time to get your first exit, it was 3 years, all of the investors on this call are going to drop off, right? Like we've really got to reset your time expectations on here if you're going to extend those timelines. So
Okay.
one of the things about BIOS, you are investing in what you call kind of, not quite underfunded, but quote unquote underrepresented regions outside of kind of the Boston, San Francisco, San Diego, hubs. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. What we found is that we're a smaller fund, obviously. We don't have a billion AUM, anything like that. And when we're competing with major funds like Flagship or Atlas or Capital, they just have so much more capital under the belt when they're investing in Cambridge. And what we found is that there's a lot of really great science that's happening outside of those regions. And for us, it's really a function of valuation. So you have just crazy valuations in the San Francisco area and in Cambridge, where you're having like $100 million Series A based on like $100 million pre-money valuation, which we just think is ridiculous. I mean, it happened, but it's just, I don't know. I think that there's a really big universe outside of those scenarios. So we like to kind of focus in, where, the center of the country gets the most NIH funding, but they receive the least amount of VC dollars. So that's kind of where we like to focus.
Yeah, that's been something that in New York we've obviously worked on over the last decade, right? Is to invert that.
Yeah. That was the statistic that people used for a long time. I think our NIH funding to venture capital dollar ratio was something like 10 cents or 15 cents for a long time. That is thankfully improved. But really, it's almost a Moneyball question, right? You have this large amount of academic research that gets funded, and it's not until you start looking under the rocks that you actually figure out what you can actually find or what you can do anything with. And for a long time, I think in a lot of places there wasn't that activity. So there wasn't the culture of dealing with investors. There wasn't the culture of thinking about company formation, because you had to, if that step is missing, it doesn't tend to happen. And even if you do pursue kind of either the SBIR route or whatever, that classically isn't always the best way to attract major investors. So what are some of the things that you think about now in terms of, looking at some of these? If you stay away from kind of the flashy $100 million Series A's, what are some of the things that kind of separate a deal that makes it something that you think really fits in with what you do?
Yeah, I mean, we found lots of really great deals, I think, over the years. I think for us, what we'd like to see is, obviously great science. I mean, I think that's implied. But, we like to see stuff that has a lot of NIH funding behind it. We've invested in a lot of different companies that kind of took technology out of a university that they had maybe 20, 30 million of NIH grant history behind them. The academic person is the academic person and didn't really know how to pursue the technology. Someone came along and licensed that technology out and kind of formed a company, and then wanted to kind of move that forward. And I think that's happened in a lot of the companies that we've invested, almost all of them, I would say, where, there's like, 20, 30 million of NIH funding. And, because it comes out of, Tyler, Texas, or Alabama, or Missouri, or, Pittsburgh, wherever it is, we're able to get like a $10 million valuation. So it's a really good deal. And there's a lot of history behind it. So just as an example, I don't think it's public yet, but we just invested in a macrophage cell therapy company that I'm on the board of called Serpent Immunotherapeutics, where, they had like $20 million in NIH funding. There's like, CNS papers going back 20 years. They took the company out of Georgia Tech University, formed a company around it. Management came in, formed a team, all that kind of stuff. And the pre-money on that was like 12 million, and they're about to go into the clinic. So deals like that, I think that's a great example of kind of the stuff that we look for.
Do you prefer to have the management team kind of in place and a license done? Because even now, some of these things are fungible, right? Some funds basically want to come in and put in their own management team, even when it's a creation. So how are the ways that you work with these kind of early stage folks?
Yeah, I would say earlier on in our history, I guess we had more appetite for company formation and more appetite to roll up our sleeves. But now we have like 18 companies in our portfolio.
Harder to do.
So it's harder. Yeah, it's harder to do that kind of stuff. And I would say our preference now is looking at companies that are already formed, where there's already a solid CEO. You can do a lot of stuff virtual, so it doesn't have to be a full management team. You can do a lot of work with CROs, that kind of stuff, and with consultants and stuff like that. But at least like a solid CEO and CSO or VP, whatever. That's kind of what we'd like to see. We do have our own network of people, but we don't really have like a really strong, pool of management team that we would like come in and place in. We like
entrepreneurs in residence that
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's something we'd like to build eventually. That's something that I'm interested in building. It's kind of like an operating team, but right now we don't have that in place. So we really prefer the management team in place.
Go ahead.
Right. Yeah. I would say too, like, the CEOs that we like to see aren't necessarily serial CEOs. A lot of the CEOs that we've seen are like, they were like a number 2 at a company before, or they were like a VP at Pfizer, something like that, where now this is kind of like their first time to shine. And, we've been relatively successful, I think, in that. So it doesn't have to be like this, seasoned entrepreneur. I know a lot of VC funds focus on teams. And I think, that's important, but I think something that's more important for us is like a coachable CEO that's willing to listen to, our collective experience as a fund, and let us help them.
Yeah. And that's one thing that sort of the New York market is coming. And we've talked about this on our virtual breakfast series, before, but like, we don't have this huge stable of CEOs or C-suite talent from early stage companies that have exited and have done it again and exited, right? Where it's like creating that sort of stable of talent. But it just takes time to, for those, all those pieces to happen to get the experienced C-suite talent. We're getting there. And hopefully all of the exits are successful, right? That create that, that level
exactly.
of talent. But in biotech, we know that's not going to be the case. Talk to us about what you look for and how you source potential deals, right? Is it all inflow? Do you work with universities? Tell us what your process is.
Yeah, so we use a mix of different sources of deal flow. We see on average 400 to 500 companies a year. So I would say some of those are literally just cold calls that come through our website. But I think a really good source for us over the last 2 to 3 years in particular are virtual conferences like Bio, Resi, JPM, Biotech Showcase. Those are a really great source of deal flow for us. Especially recently where you can do all that kind of stuff virtual. You don't have to worry about slushing up the hills of SF. So it's really easy nowadays to do that. And then, we do work with a number of universities. So I would say I'm an EIR at 2 universities in Texas. And we have relationships with dozens of them throughout the country. So some of the stuff that they'll send is a little bit too early stage for us. We're normally like Series A, and the stuff that they send us is usually seed round. But we still like to see stuff and have a pulse of what's going on at the universities. I think it's a great source of deal flow. But yeah, I would say like virtual conferences are amazing. That's the biggest source of deal flow for us.
So how has your process changed with the pandemic, with Zoom, et cetera? I imagine you could see a lot more companies now, but given the stage that you look at, right? Everyone needs money. It doesn't surprise me they send you stuff that's probably a little early for you. So what does your rejection process look like, for lack of a better word, right? With the amount of deal flow that you see, how do you manage to pass politely, or how do you manage to kind of tell people that we want to see a little more, or we want to come back to you? How did you, with that many deals coming in, how do you manage the no's or the maybes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we've refined our process over the last 5 years. We've had some great people that have helped on our deal flow team to kind of like refine that process over the years. But, I would say we triage a lot of stuff. There's some stuff that we get that we don't invest in, like devices, med tech, certain therapeutic areas, like metabolic diseases, things like that. And then from there, we'll kind of, triage stuff if it's outside of our scope. And then if it's interesting, we'll kind of schedule a call. And then through a call, I think we're pretty, we'll either say no, that it's not a fit for us, or yeah, we'll do some more research, and then we'll sign an NDA. I would say probably like 5% of the deals that come through go to that stage, and then we'll do a lot of diligence. So I think it's really important, and I try to do this as much as I can. I do it 100% of the time, but I try to be as upfront as I can to management and the entrepreneurs, because I don't want to waste their time. I don't want them to waste my time by harassing me or whatever, So I just try to say either it's not a fit for our scope, it's too early or too late, or, we want to see XYZ data, come back to us when you have that kind of stuff. A lot of times, in immuno-oncology, for example, I think the bar is higher on what kind of preclinical data we want to see. I want to see robust PDX models, want to see comparison against checkpoint inhibitors, whatever it is, standard of care, positive, negative controls. So that, I think the bar is higher for certain areas. It's a pretty canned response where I can say this is interesting, but I would like to see some more in vivo data come back to us when you have that. So yeah, I try to be as direct as I can, but I'm sure. Yeah.
So interested in your perceptions of New York, both kind of from really the outside before you got here, and what your perception was like when you kind of got on the ground and started to either see people in person or see a little bit more of the ecosystem up front.
Yeah. So yeah, just a little context. I moved here last summer, so last July. So pretty recent, but I have been on the board of NewYorkBIO here in New York for 3 years maybe. So I've been to New York a lot. So yeah, I think my perception of New York before I came here is that there's this massive bustling biotech scene. It was just a little bit elusive. I didn't know how to get into it. And then when I got here, I was going to a couple of events in person finally, last fall. And, I started to see the same people at the same events. I was like, wow, this is actually a much smaller community than I expected. And so, it's that kind of surprised me is how small the New York community is and how, interconnected it is. I saw like one person, like I went to a networking event at something and I saw like one person I was, supposed to talk on the phone the next day. And then I saw, at another event, like someone that I just met like 2 weeks ago and, we're talking, it's just very, very small and interconnected, I would say. But yeah, to me, it's, once I'm here, there seems to be so much intellectual capital. Like a lot of universities, I've worked with Cornell last semester, I guess. And you have, Columbia, Mount Sinai, all these institutions, and it just doesn't seem like there's the biotech focused venture capital to kind of match it. It's, it seems like there's sufficient talent because you have Pfizer, you have, the stuff in New Jersey. But it just seems like there's a little bit of a gap between all of the academic stuff that's happening and the company formation that I kind of expected. So,
yeah, I think there's definitely been an evolution, and we actually had Mark Sidamon last week from NYU Langone and to talk about the work that they've been doing, right, to not only increase, I think, their impact on the ecosystem, but just like the knowledge of it, because I think that there's also a gap between what we've seen and talking to different, and we've had Oren Herskovitz on from Columbia, and the difference in acknowledging and understanding what all the universities are putting out, right? And because I think people tend to get in their silos, and it's interesting, right? And you're like, oh, okay, so I didn't know this was happening over here, but it is. And so that's one way that New York Bio helps kind of bring the information to sort of to everybody. But I think that particularly has been more of a challenge during COVID, when everything tends to be sort of digital. I think you lost a little bit of that organic. Some things are easier, and then we lost some of the organic information sharing that we'd had before.
Yeah, I think so. I think that in-person loss has been difficult. Although one of the things you hit on was, it's interesting. You think about New York and you think about Wall Street, you think about the amount of finance that's here. And for many years, we didn't really have or at least enough of the company creation style biotech type investors. We didn't have an Atlas, we didn't have a Third Rock. We had really good biotech investors. We had between Aisling, OrbiMed, et cetera. Although most of the deals that they would get into were in San Francisco and Cambridge. So I think we've kind of had this interesting path where we've always had great science. And then we kind of got our foot in the door with a few different venture folks. So I'll highlight Carlo Rizzuto here, who was one of the first on the ground. It's been incredible. And you have the Alexandria folks so we kind of started to build on top of all of this. And now it's encouraging to me every time I see someone like you, someone like a Medical Excellence Capital go and start to open their doors here, because that's another entrant and another kind of outlet for all of these companies and universities that are looking for, they're all looking for seed funding, all of them. And for a long time, there was no one local to turn to. And now that's started to change. So the progress is slow. I suppose it's slow and then fast. I think a lot of this has been developing over the last decade or so. But I really think that vibrant exchange between early stage capital and company formation is one of the big things that just kind of supercharge the ecosystem. So
one universal observation, I think, from everyone I've talked to here so far is that things are progressing, and it's a much different environment than it was 10, 15 years ago. Even the last 5 years, I think there's been a lot of local and state initiatives that have really helped. And it just all takes time, right? But I think it's starting to change, and that's what sentiment that I've gotten repeatedly from a lot of different people.
The other thing that we've heard over and over again from kind of the CEOs that we've had on this program is that from a talent perspective, it's here. Everybody can recruit. You can get great scientists. You can get great people. And it's interesting. You think about the seasoned CEOs. I would highlight Nancy Thornberry as somebody who wasn't previously a CEO, but has been just a spectacular addition to this ecosystem. And we have, well, I don't think there's a lot of people like Nancy, but I do think we have a lot of people who have had either excellent careers in biopharma and who were able to step into those leadership roles. Michael Aberman is another one. We have these people that have this great experience. Their resume just doesn't read CEO for the last 15 years, but I think they're there, and I think the experience that they bring to these companies, I think is incredibly valuable. And then your next gen companies are even stronger because of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think, talent is a huge problem in Connecticut, where we're halfway between New York and Boston.
Yeah.
And it used to just be Boston that we were competing with, but now it's New York too. So
yeah, you can leave north or you can leave south.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, we welcome people to commute in from Connecticut if they like living there.
Very
like
commutable.
New York.
It really is. Yeah.
In New Jersey too. We welcome all.
Yeah. So here's another question. You talked a bit about the equity research side of things, and this is actually an interesting kind of little piece of our ecosystem, because you do have the draw of Wall Street. You do have folks that leave their PhDs and go directly into something like an equity analyst role, and it's really interesting because not too many people leave those roles and those functions once they get there. Right. So you kind of, it's interesting. You get, I think, this different experience set, but why do you think that is? Why do you think that, once someone steps into the equity research black hole, you kind of lose them from an operational perspective?
Yeah.
If it's just money, you could say if it's just that simple, that might be it.
I feel like it is, honestly. And I feel like, once you're in the equity research role, I mean, a lot of people will do equity research for like 2 to 4 years, and a lot of them will go into iBanking or, into the ECM side. But, they kind of stay within one of the 3 prongs of a bank, right? It seems like maybe that's all they know. Maybe the money is so good. Yeah, I'm not sure. I do know some people that have gone from banking, whether it's, an analyst role or iBanking, to an operating role, and they can be successful, but it's a big risk, and a lot of times they can be successful, but they're missing some crucial component that is kind of missing. Like, I've seen people that just don't know how to develop a drug. They can be the smartest people in the world and know theoretically some of the challenges, but once you get to the nitty gritty of manufacturing, putting your CMC package and your IND together, and what it takes to put together an IND, which is very difficult. That's where they kind of struggle, and managing some of those pieces, and kind of like that project management piece and having everything aligned and that kind of stuff. So it's difficult for that transition, but I've seen it before. It's just you have to hire the right people to help you.
There's definitely a learning curve. It's one of the things where they know it's a thing that has to be done, but they actually have no idea how to do that thing. It's kind of easy to put it into a spreadsheet and say this should start here and this should end here and it should last a year or so. And it's like, okay, well, let's actually get down to do it. And then there's a little bit of a gap there. So, I mean, you've spent time in a number of different ecosystems between, Texas, New York, London, Connecticut. What are some of the things that you take away on, I'll say, a local level? Do they all have certain things in common that are advantageous, or does really each place kind of take on its own personality in terms of how things happen?
Yeah, I think each one has its own personality for sure. Like in tech, the problems that we're having in Texas are similar, I would say, to New York, but a little bit different. Like there's a lot of great science in Dallas, Houston, Austin. There's kind of that lack of their early company capital that we talked about. And I would say there's different from New York, there's less talent there because you don't really have, like the Pfizer's, some of the really successful biotech companies in Texas. So I feel like that's something that we struggle with. And then in Connecticut, I would say the same problem of, you might have more early stage VCs there. You have, Connecticut Innovations, which is like the state arm that helps provide some state capital. So that's really good. So I feel like there's the capital isn't so much a problem, but retaining people and having talent, that's a huge problem because we lose it to New York or Boston, especially, obviously. So yeah, that's the problem with Connecticut. So I feel like.
Wait, I was just going to ask you about that. Do you think that happens when the people like lose their connection or decide to move on from their university careers? Is that when that inflection point is, that you're losing talent once they're no longer tied to a particular lab at the university?
Yeah, I think so. I definitely. I feel like, the major centers are either Farmington with UConn or New Haven with Yale.
Right.
And honestly, like, a lot of people from New Haven would go on to Boston or New York. There's just more to do, more, better quality of life, et cetera. So yeah, I think that's the problem. So yeah, I feel like, in some of these areas, it's one of four things. It's either science, which I think there's good science everywhere.
Yeah.
Early stage capital, talent, and kind of like location. So I feel like, it's kind of a combination of those.
So one of the things that needs to happen is eventually that talent or that deal needs to be connected with you. So we had a question from Terry Willie, who ran tech transfer at Mount Sinai and then Cold Spring Harbor and is now at IU Ventures. And her question is a good one. And it's, how would you like to have new opportunities introduced to you, right? What makes it easier for you kind of at the top of the funnel that either makes you want to take a look at something, especially if it comes from someplace new? I mean, one of the challenges of being outside of particular hubs and having deals that can come from anywhere is your deals can come from anywhere. So what's the best kind of top of the funnel introduction for you?
Yeah, I mean, just shoot me an email, I guess. I mean, I never turned down the opportunity to look at companies. I think that especially in new geographies, we haven't invested that much in New York besides NewYorkBIO's, so I think we're open to it. Or our email, it's opportunities@biospartners.com. That's kind of like our canned stuff, but we do take a look at everything. So we do take a look at everything we get. But sending me an email here, can I just put that in the chat? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just put it in the chat. So feel free to email me. Yeah, I think that's the best way. And emailing me like a non-confidential slide deck. It's frustrating to me when I get like, just like a description that's very vague or whatever. I've seen this all the time, but send me like the non-confidential slides, and then we'll take a look.
Yeah, it gives you a little more to go on to start with. We've had several people ask how do we connect Travis? So we've got that. Thanks, Travis. And then there's a question from the audience, more specifically about the type of companies you all invest in. What are your thoughts on platform versus individual compound companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think in our portfolio, we like to diversify and have both. So I like both. We've sold a single asset to Novartis for over $1 billion. So that was, it's very successful. It was one drug. There was no platform at all. It may be able to go into glaucoma, but we've had other platforms. NewYorkBIO is a platform that's using gamma delta T cells. They're engineering them. We have Immusoft that's engineering B cells. That's a platform that we treated for multiple diseases. And then we have some companies like Actuate Therapeutics that has a single molecule that is going into pancreatic cancer. They had like a 70% disease control rate in pancreatic cancer, which is amazing. So for us, we like to have both in our portfolio. I think for some of the, it depends on what that platform is. I think for cell gene therapy, we like to see something that's kind of differentiated, like not just another CD19 CAR T or something. but something that's kind of differentiated and using a different target for their first demonstration of the platform. I know the appeal of using a CD19 CAR, but there's now 145 in development, so no more of those.
But the next
yeah.
one is going to be great.
Right? Yeah.
It's always the 146th one that gets you.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's okay. As a woman in her 40s, I will be looking to see if Novartis is running any clinical trials on the presbyopia.
Yes. I keep asking for some of the drug, but they don't give it to me. So
Exactly. Yeah. I'm like, oh,
So-
this is interesting.
So where do you think we're going, to open it up here? So where do you think we're going from a capital standpoint, right? Because we have, we had so many companies that managed to go public. We have, venture funds that have, all loaded up. You said you guys have raised another fund or are raising another fund. We do have, kind of a depressed, sector in terms of public valuations. What kind of market does that create going forward? Do you think that kind of the $50 million A round is here to stay, or do you think we're actually progressing towards some kind of new normal of company formation and the pendulum is swinging back a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of factors here, right? I think I'll start in the public markets. I mean, obviously everyone knows how terrible the public biotech markets are right now. Last I checked, it was down 50% in a year. Now it's probably 60% this week. It's depressing, but I think that there's a lot of different factors that are behind that. I think Bruce Booth tweeted out a great tweet yesterday of just how many failures there have been lately. So I think it's just been like, really not living up to people's expectations. And you had a massive number of IPOs last year. I think 51 IPOs. For the first time in history, there were more IPOs than M&A events. So you have lower M&A. And then, the IPOs that happened, they're so early stage. You had the biggest mix of early stage IPOs in history. And, when you don't have news flow for a year, that's what happens. Their stock price goes down. I mean, that's why you don't IPO so early. So, I think it's a combination of all those factors. And I'm sure, there's macro trends as well. But, I think all that to say, there's not a lack of capital out there. There's like tons of capital still out there. I don't think that's the problem. But I think some of the valuations from the public markets are going to trickle into the private markets over the next 12, 24 months. And I think that, right now the IPO markets, I would say, are closed. I don't think you can go out and do a successful IPO right now in biotech. And so, I think that's going to create a distortion and kind of, a reset, I guess, in the valuations in the private markets. Because what we're seeing, I did an analysis from PitchBook, and private valuations last year were up like 1.5x from 2020 or 2019, I can't remember. But you just have like this massive upswing in private valuations, and I feel like that's just going to slow down because the path to an IPO, which is the natural progression, is just not going to happen for the next 12 months. So I think we're going to have a reset in the private valuations in the market. I don't think there's going to be a lack of capital out there yet. And we'll just kind of see a reset in the valuations. And I think hopefully things will start to stabilize towards the end of this year. We keep saying that M&A is going to come back. We've been saying that for, 14 months. But I do think that that's going to come back. I think that, pharma has, in our last analysis, $500 billion in cash at the end of 2021. So they have tons of cash. A lot of them have indicated that there's going to be a lot of M&A this year. You have companies like Pfizer and Moderna that are just making bucket loads of money off COVID. So there's lots of cash flow. It's just a matter of them putting it to use. And with things so cheap right now, I don't see why they don't do it more. So hopefully that'll play out over the next quarter or two. We'll see.
Yeah, waiting for M&A is kind of waiting for M&A in the biotech sector is kind of a fun game that we seem to play every year, right? Every year in December, we wonder at if JP Morgan is going to kind of kick off the year in good fashion, and it's going to be some sort of leading indicator for things to come. Kind of like you said, there's a lot of stuff in the public markets that's early, right? So, you know, in order for things to fit from an M&A standpoint, you usually have to have something that fits into, you know, what they want in the pipe for an acquisition. So, you know, we don't make predictions like that here or anything, but you know, it's going to be very interesting to see how the market reacts and where kind of strategy from the larger biopharmas goes, and if they're the most active acquirers. Who knows whether the mid-stage folks step up their M&A game too, just given both the availability and the depressed price point of a lot of assets out there. But I think the one thing that we've seen is the science is that I don't think any of this has impacted the science, right? I think you have a lot of really interesting stuff that was able to hit the markets. You have a lot of really interesting stuff in the clinic, even beyond CD19 targeted CAR T cells. So
right. Definitely, yeah, and I think that it's, there's been some bumps along the way in things like gene therapies, and even some therapies, some safety issues, things like that. But I think overall those fields are progressing, and you know, I think we're getting closer to some of these approvals and stuff. But it's just a grueling road so far.
It's really interesting. We've had a number of discussions in and around gene therapy, whether it's at our you know, annual meeting or whether it's here. The gene therapy field in particular seems, I would say, both resilient and really smart. They all seem to learn from kind of each N=1 setback, failure, or whatever. And in a lot of cases, because they're dealing with either rare diseases or small patient subsets, there seems to be a lot of kind of very focused knowledge on solving particular pieces of a biological problem. So kind of bringing that back to you and to BIOS, how do you guys think about kind of biology and information like that? Are there places where you look to see a team have a really good grasp of the biology they're going after? Or is that something where, you know, you kind of can see where the path is going to go, and you're aware of kind of where they're going to try and sort things out?
I think in a space like that in gene therapy, you have to be really smart about what you invest in. There's a lot of stuff out there. So we've invested in 2 gene therapy companies. One is Taysha Gene Therapies, where that came from R.A. Session, who was on the Vexus team, I believe, before that got acquired by Novartis. And they had like a lot of people from that team. No, it was Spark Gene Therapy, sorry. So anyway, there were a lot of people from that team that were on Taysha. He took a lot of assets out of UT Southwestern and created like his own manufacturing. Had a massive facility in North Carolina. So we felt really confident going into that we had a really successful team that could pull that off. And then our second one is called Opus Genetics, and that came out of Gene Bennett's lab, who was the inventor behind Luxturna at CHOP. And so, you know, we felt in both of those examples, we had teams that had pulled it off before, especially with Gene Bennett's work, really impressive work. You know, they formed a company around some of the other work that she was doing around ocular gene therapies. And they were all kind of rare diseases, and felt pretty good about it. So I think in gene therapy, where there's still some stuff to figure out, like neutralizing antibodies against some of these vectors, you know, some safety stuff, I feel like you need an experienced team to pull that off.
Yeah, I would agree. I think in particular, that field is moving so fast, and it is really in a lot of ways, it's a pretty concentrated N=1 shot, right? So you kind of have to know pretty intimately what kind of things you're dealing with and where the potholes may come up, because each setback is really kind of difficult for the company.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it can kill a whole program.
So what?
Sorry.
No. So we have less than 10 minutes. So talk to us about what you see as far as your stage of investing for BIOS Partners over the next 5 years. And are there areas, and I'll even go a little further, are there areas of the country, since you do focus right on sort of non-hub geographies, that you find to be exciting? And if you don't say New York, we're going to have to cut you off immediately.
You're
Yeah, I mean, I think New York is obviously lots happening for sure. And I think we're pretty agnostic to geographies. I think we live in an age where you can find something out of New York or Georgia or Alabama, and then in the case of NewYorkBIO, the technology came from Alabama, and the team is in New York. And very successful. And it's a really good model because, lab space is a lot cheaper in Alabama, but the team is here in New York. And that's a really good model. But yeah, I would say over the next 5 years, we're super agnostic to geography. I think we're about to raise, a fund to look at public companies, and then we're going to raise another fund to do private VC investment. And with that fund, it'll be a much larger fund, I think, than what we've done historically. So, with that, I think we're kind of looking for a mix of company formation, having like a pool of stuff that we can really build companies, and then having, kind of more capital to do what we've done historically, like Series A, B investing. And, I want to see some, there's some gaps in our portfolio that I would love to see. There's like, RNA therapeutics, siRNA, stuff that we haven't done yet. We've done a lot in cell therapy, so kind of getting away from that, perhaps. Looking at kind of next gen gene therapies. We're looking at some companies that are looking to avoid the neutralizing antibody problem with the current adenoviruses. So stuff like that, kind of next gen stuff is kind of what I'm really interested in, but pretty agnostic about how we do that.
And
you haven't
clearly
said artificial. I was going to say, you haven't said artificial intelligence yet. Are you really a venture capitalist? Are you actually a venture capitalist?
We do have an AI company portfolio, so I would say yes.
Okay, yes. You check the box, yes.
Yeah.
I was going to say, while I was mostly joking, right, with my New York quip, I do think that actually, I think New York can play an important role in companies that form, and I think the pandemic may have actually accelerated our understanding of being able to have, IP come from one place and a team in another, and some team virtual, right? Like I think the borders have become, if not more, not transparent, at least more fuzzy into how we can create a company. Talk to us about how you work with companies to support them when they have people and assets in all sort of different places.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that just takes project management and coordinating with different CROs and CDMOs. So we have like a database of contractors that we've used over the years. So when a company comes to us and says, hey, do you have a good CDMO in cell therapy? We have a list of ones that we've had. Hey, do you have a good IP attorney? Yeah, here's Chloe. Stuff like that. Where we kind of have a list of people and different vendors and stuff that we worked with in the past. So in the case of Encore Vision, for example, literally one full-time employee when we sold the company to Novartis. And the rest of it was like, contractors and virtual. So I think you can sell a company for $1 billion. I mean, we've done it. When you have a very skeleton company and you're kind of working with different CROs and stuff, it's very doable, and especially today, even more so than a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Although, are you looking forward to doing things in person some as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think one of the things that you don't really get when you're investing in companies virtually is that in-person interaction. And, when you're going to, invest in somebody basically, close to marriage, it's like, I want to meet in person and, see how they interact, see how they, behave in a social environment, stuff like that. So I definitely want to have more of that for sure.
Yeah, I think more than anything, we've now had doors opened that weren't open before, right? We've now had, there used to be a mantra about how you built a team. they were all in the same place. You got on a plane and flew to Europe for a single investor meeting. That doesn't happen anymore. There's kind of, these things have now, I think, changed in such a way where there's new ways of doing them, and those new ways are super efficient. So I mean, we had people had put together the networks of service providers and things before, and now it's almost like we've taken that one step further, and there's got to be some level of, I don't know about optimal efficiency, but there's just ways where good people are going to get good things done, and you've now kind of removed a lot of the geographical borders on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a lot easier to fundraise. We have to fundraise obviously too. So
Yeah.
And I fundraise as a company and stuff. And it's just so much easier when you can stack everything virtually. You don't have to fly out to a meeting that you don't know if it's going to produce anything. So I think in that sense it's gotten so much more efficient.
Yeah. Plus your potential investors can, take the time and do initial meetings, and then, and then you can always have more. I think the initial meeting has changed dramatically. I still think at the end of the day, the deal will require, usually deals will require some sort of in-person connection, right? But a lot of the initial work, I think, can be done via Zoom or another platform.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think with the market, we're probably done with the days of, we had 3 Zoom meetings and raised $75 million and none of us ever met in person. I think those are probably
done. Yeah.
But I think that's okay. On all of this, we're coming up on 10 o'clock. I mean, we're always excited to have people like you step into New York, and like you said, there's that kind of capital that's been needed. And when you have people that are genuinely interested in getting their hands dirty, finding good science, and kind of getting that 0 to 1 starting point, I think it impacts everybody around them. So we've got 2 minutes. Do you want any sort of closing calls or anything like that? What do you want to tell us in the last 2 minutes of the show?
Oh man, I don't know. Just excited to be here in New York. I think I'm looking for new companies to invest in and stuff that's kind of early stage, Series A-ish. I put my contact info in the chat, so feel free to send me slide decks, whatever. Would love to network with people. I'm still new to the area. It's only been 8 months, so I'm trying to still network with different stakeholders in the area. So yeah.
Well, we'll have an opportunity for you Monday, April 18th.
18th.
Right, 18th. New York Bio is going to host an in-person networking event at Spin. So everybody can come play ping pong and network and have a cocktail or two.
Perfect. That's great.
Because you never know in April what the weather's going to be like in New York.
Ping pong is an all-weather sport.
Exactly.
All-weather sport, especially when played inside.
Travis, thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks to the audience. This was a great conversation, and I know folks learned a lot. So we really appreciate your time and your engagement.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
All right, thanks everybody. Have a good Tuesday.
Thanks so much. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to New York Bio's virtual breakfast series. Join us every Tuesday at 9 a.m. for more discussions with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. For more information on New York Bio, please visit us at www.newyorkbio.org.